everybody. Welcome. I'm Ross Weiner from the Aspen Institute's Education and Society program. And thank you for joining us for this session on prepping our kids for college. What will the next decade teach us? And for me, this session epitomizes why we come to the Ideas Festival. So to get a chance to discuss the issues we read about in the news with the people who make the news. So David Coleman, president of the College Board, has been leading change for a long time, has big ideas for how to improve American education in the coming years. And he'll be interviewed this afternoon by Jane Stoddard Williams, who's the host and executive producer of Bloomberg EDU, and also somebody who's deeply involved in education around the country. So we're in for a treat this afternoon. And Jane, thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm amazed that any of you are here. We were watching the soccer game and thinking, God. Well, first of all, I think we need to propose a toast. We wanted to have alcohol here to reward you for being here, but we can't. To the U.S. soccer team, because they did an amazing job, even though they did not get it done today. Speaking of grit, tenacity, perseverance, and all those other things, they excelled. But now to reward you for being here, it's time to clear your desks and take out your number 2 pencils. Does everybody remember that? Of all the things that we forget, you know, our hotel room numbers or the person we met last night, we all somehow remember our SAT scores, thanks to the College Board. And a couple of years ago...
You're welcome.
A couple of years ago, the College Board made the brilliant decision to hire David Coleman. And David has already made huge changes at the College Board. So we're going to talk today about his work there, but also his work before he got there, because as you may know, David was, I think he says, or people say, one of the, but maybe the main architect of the Common Core standards. And since he has left that work and gone to the College Board, he's been very quiet about what's gone on in Common Core since in those 2 years. And so he will share with us his thoughts to the extent that he feels he can, and to the extent he feels comfortable today, and we very much appreciate that. I've sort of been chasing him down for the last 2 years, because he came on the radio with me right before he went to College Board, and we talked a lot about Common Core, and since then he's just said, nope, can't talk about it, can't talk about it, can't talk about it. So here we are, and we're going to talk about it. So let's start, because we're supposed to be looking out at 2014. I read this morning that Bill Gates said to the Associated Press that eradicating malaria, tuberculosis, and polio is easier than fixing the US education system. Not a surprise to you.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I have a really practical suggestion about people's mood about the game, just to start with. So I was at the gym before coming here, and I met this other guy who turned on the TV to watch the game while we were at the gym. And I was like, how are we doing? And he said, who's we? Because he is from Belgium.
Ah.
So if you are angry right now, there's a guy named Fred from Belgium. He has a giveaway tattoo on his left leg. And so I'm thinking kind of after this, we can go stalk him. Basically. So that was my first suggestion, just my warm-up kind of thought. And then the second thing, which is, you know, as hard as the US winning such an event would be fixing, you know, why would eradicating polio, malaria be easier than making real progress in this field? I think what's good about that is it begins to confront some terrible facts, which I know all of you know, but I want to tell them because I'm not sure they're clear and they should be shared. So it's a small enough group, if I were to give you a poll, let's play a game. And I'm going to ask you about, it's really this fun, reading scores in 4th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade over the last 40 years, as much as we can measure them. And in 4th grade, are they A, increasing, B, staying the same, or C, declining? And so for 8th grade, so for 12th grade. You have to vote for one of the 3 choices, or you're a wimp.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, in the last 40 years, have 4th grade reading scores A, improved? Raise your hand. B, stay the same? C, diminished? Have reading scores in 8th grade improved, stayed the same, C, diminished? In 12th grade, have reading scores A, improved, B, stayed the same, C, diminished? You're pretty damn good at this game. The facts are, darn good, I am a president now. The facts are that reading scores in early grades have improved, and we've even done some good work closing the achievement gap in early reading. 8th grade reading scores are as flat as a tabletop for 40 years. And in 12th grade, they are declining by every measure, whether it's ACT or SAT. I say that, Jane, because that's after a 40-year crusade.
Right.
I mean, you have to, when you've hit a wall, you better admit the wall. And I think that what Bill Gates is trying to say is, despite a lot of investment, despite his wealth, despite a lot of attempts, he's worried that he's not moving it enough, which is very honest and decent to admit that when confronting something. And if you ask me kind of what keeps me up at night and what everything I do is about, it's trying to really take that on. We also see other walls that are frightening. In the past 40 years, despite the civil rights movement, we see no movement in the performance of African Americans, particularly at the highest ends of performance. This is a heartbreaking betrayal of what that movement was meant to produce. It's shocking, and it is regardless of social income. So we're hitting walls that are substantial. So I think the question for us all, if we are reformers or not, but if we are educators, is how do we fundamentally move them?
So as you look ahead another 10 years, are we still up against that wall, or are you optimistic that we've broken through in some places?
I think we must and can break through. But that's a deep ambition. That is, to say that is to say we can do things we haven't done before. So what kinds of things give me promise? It's a very interesting question, because as president of the College Board, I think it used to be okay if we measured well and gave reliable indicators to the country. These are your SAT scores. This many kids have passed AP. But if you're trying to move the College Board to a different position, which is these unchanging numbers must change, that's a very different institution. Those numbers, and it's very interesting. I want to be very clear. Gaston, who is the extraordinary leader of the College Board before me, built a financially strong institution from one that was not by democratizing advanced placement. And it was a beautiful thing to do, because many kids are doing more rigorous work. But it must give us all pause, including us at the College Board, that during that same period we grew in financial strength and stability. Reading scores didn't shift, and they're declining in later grades. Like, you got to own that finally. So what do we do? A couple of things. I think we have to name a few numbers we actually can move, or people are going to despair. Does that make sense? I think there's a great sense of despair in the education community that, like, it's nice to say it's important, it's nice to say you're doing something about it, but we get occasional breakthrough results, but nothing fundamental. So we've tried to take on a couple of problems that you might call manageable as a first step, and I'll do this fast so you can ask me another question. But take, for example, the fact that in our data set, if you take kids in the top 10% of SAT scores, but in the bottom quartile of income, so they are poor but extraordinary. Think of the odds they've defied.
Right.
Take that person. 50 to 70% of such children today, such students, do not apply to a single selective college. They betray themselves at the moment it matters most. And we decided that that's not okay. That while it may not be our fault, it is our problem. And we just began in Delaware, which, by the way, I realize is about the size of this tent. But after an intervention developed together with the governor, we sent packets to all these kids. We sent fee waivers for them to apply more broadly to college. Now, 98% of those kids have not only applied but enrolled in demanding schools. So that changes a life. And I think that we have to start looking for holding ourselves accountable to those changes.
Okay, and that's one of the changes that you've made just in the last couple of years, is to really focus on that. And I didn't mention, but I think all of you know, and you just referred to this, that College Board also is in charge of the AP program, which is
Exactly right.
a whole other thing, but very important. Let's go back a little bit and talk about you and how you became the kid who grew up to care about standards.
I'm much more comfortable talking about education policy than myself.
But let's talk about that, because you went to the New York Public Schools.
Yes.
You went to Yale.
Yeah.
You're a Rhodes Scholar.
I am.
You started a nonprofit. Do you wake up one morning and say, you know what, we need standards, we need the states to agree? How did this happen? What is it about you? What happened?
You know, I want to be actually candid about something I don't think we talk about enough. So this would be a moment of openness, which is, I think as people grow in supposed influence and power in the world, they get very self-destructively busy. So people think if they're important, they don't have time to write their own speeches or to be alone for extended periods of time. And it's been essential. Any piece of good work I've done has emerged this balance of a lot of time spent alone thinking. So when my company got acquired by McGraw-Hill, I did a very strange thing. I had built a company to make assessment results more useful. And while it was a good idea, and Lisa's here with me, and you know, she was with me on this journey, it wasn't enough. I found that while we could make the assessments of the results of current tests a little more useful for parents and kids, the standards beneath them were a mess. The exams themselves were relatively superficial. And so what did I do? I went half-time at work because I needed time to think. And all my thinking about standards, and even today as I think about how do you take on this wall, I spend large periods of time trying to stop acting and reflect on what are those core fundamentals that actually could contribute to something significant. And so one idea that I've been cultivating over a long time is, could kids do far fewer things very well in school? Could that be a relief to teachers who would have time to teach, kids who would have time to practice, but could we then be honest that these are non-negotiable and make them as engaging as possible, leaving room for the spirit and other activities and a broader development of kids? But that's a big idea to try to wrestle to the ground. But since I am in a room of important and powerful people, I would it's almost embarrassing to admit how much time I need to spend alone and to consider as part of trying to do anything good.
And so that's where the idea of the standards came from for you?
The idea comes from a lot of listening, which is the other key skill. So, people talk about entrepreneurs as visionaries. Have you guys all heard this talk? They're really creative. There's nothing, in a way, more annoying, frankly, than the sanctimony of the entrepreneur. The world was dark, and then I came, and there was light. Have you heard this story before? I find it so deeply annoying.
That's what I read about you. It's not true.
Yeah.
We can all leave.
And exactly. Let's get a drink, because I'm clearly not worth it. No, honestly, I think what it also does is disrespect all the people whose lives have been in the system for a much longer time and their accumulated wisdom, which is not a smart way to get something done. So I'll tell you how Grow started as an example. I observed that while everyone talked about using data to guide instruction, that we gave teachers results when? At the end of the year when their class was leaving. We gave parent test scores at the beginning of the summer when they had no one to talk to about them. So in other words, that's not visionary, that's just being a witness. Entrepreneurship is about telling the truth. Entrepreneurship is about admitting that despite the nobility of the standards movement, the standards became endless, like book length. So it sounds good. Have you guys ever served on a committee to write something?
No, I'm sure.
How do you end a committee meeting? You put everyone's stuff in. That's just honest. So academic standards became inevitably vast and vague. And then the truth of a teacher's experience of academic standards is Russian roulette. They have to race through them. They don't know what's going to be on the exam. And all of a sudden, the standards movement becomes much crueler and stupider than it ever meant to be. And I think it's that kind of candor that the solitude and listening allows you.
And there have been a lot of articles, I'm sure you've seen them or heard about them in recent months as the Common Core has become more and more controversial, debated, fraught, that have said David Coleman came up with this idea. The article in the Post said, Coleman went to Bill Gates, they got it, they did it. So here, with this group of witnesses, please set the record straight for how the Common Core standards came to be. You were there. Who was involved? How did it happen?
It's so interesting because when facts become political, and one of the reasons I avoid talking about it is taking a side or another interests me very little, but I'll try to tell you what I think are simple, agreed upon facts,
or just what
which
happened.
is that the movement towards common standards began a long, long time ago. We're talking about Bush presidency a long time ago, if we're talking about politics here, where governors got together first on the American Diploma Project, for example, to create a shared sense of college readiness. Why, by the way? It's not complicated. Remediation rates are out of control. So kids get their high school degrees, they then go into remediation when they get to college. So for governors and state chiefs, this is stupid. I mean, it's not complicated. If you have a set of standards, it's a holy bargain. If kids have done these things, they ought to be ready. So they said, hey, we ought to have a set of common college and career-ready standards. That was an impulse that developed over a 20-year period. The other really deep concept here that I hope that we can get beyond is one of evidence. What I mean by that, the interesting question is not actually about Bill Gates or my personality. That's intriguing for some. But is there evidence that fewer things done well in math catapult you forward? That's true of all the high-performing countries in math, and what a relief. What good news that is. But then I'm going to go a little further, Jane, if it's okay. And you can stop me if this is boring. But I think then we make a great mistake by caricaturing the opponents of the standards as crazies or people who don't tell the truth. That is a temptation that I think is killing us in our society quite more generally. So, opponents of the standards are very anxious about federal intervention. They're very anxious about federal involvement in these things. And I was speaking at a group in Harvard, a bunch of university folks and K-12 folks, this is my want these days, And let's just say it would have been easy in that setting to say those crazy people worried about federal involvement. But when I ask the university people how they feel about the federal government getting involved in individual student records, all of a sudden a great disquiet entered the room. If you know, this community is very worried, some of the homeschooling community, about privacy and individual data. You could call that paranoid, but have you read the newspaper lately about what's going on with data in this country? And these parents see kids getting bad crap back in their textbooks. And they've been angry about it for a long time. And they're worried about the quality of what their kids read. They're worried about the math problems being obscure and not making sense. And that's true of a lot of parents on the left and the right. And so I think that one thing at this political moment to begin to do is to realize that while some facts are right or wrong, that people are rightly concerned about certain things, and to honor that and to try to work with them as opposed to.
And that is a novel concept in K-12 education, period.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're going to spend most of our time finding out what you're interested in hearing about, so please have your questions ready for David. But I understand that you don't think how it all started is important, and part of that is modesty, and part of it is it's just, you know, it's fraught. But part of the issues, one of the issues that's come up since, in the couple years since you've been at the College Board, is this question of, was this really the Obama administration? Was this really federal overreach? Was this really a bunch of just intellectuals in a small group? Why weren't more people involved? Why didn't we talk more about this? So it does seem that the origins do matter to some people. Was this really governors? Was this really a state's idea? What do you say to those people who want to know?
I want to say I think their concerns are principled. The anxiety parents have about not being adequately involved, let me take it down a level, because I think we're misunderstanding everything. That's the slogan that resonates. But have you ever been frustrated as a parent when your kid comes home with a math textbook that you don't think is any good, if any of you are mathematically minded? I know a lot of people like that. And they are so frustrated. What do I do now? Because I want my kid to learn math? I think this textbook's a mess, and you're mad. And if you are like a friend of mine and create worksheets for your child to use, you are now a homeschooler. So I say this because I'm trying to go deeper, Jane, which is I think that the accusations, the flare-up about Obama, these ways of talking are means to express deeper anxiety. An anxiety that people have lost control of things of consequence. And frankly, it's not so bad that parents are intrigued by questions of what their kids should learn and care about it and don't want that decided far away from them. So my sense of the facts of the matter is, I mean, to put it quite simply, if you, like I, have read through of hundreds of pages of state feedback month after month in designing a set of standards, the notion that states weren't involved is sadly not the state of my life during those years. There was so much involvement and interaction. But that's the easy path. Because a parent who's upset about the book that their child's been given, that's no solace to them. So I think we face a deeper question, if that makes sense, in this movement of people who are angry about decisions far away from them.
It does make sense, and I do think that setting the record straight is important while also acknowledging that parents' concerns and teachers' concerns and everybody's concerns are valid. So we're now, this has become an election issue. A few states have walked back. I promise we'll get off this topic soon, but what is your sense of the future for Common Core?
I don't know. I think that what I hope is that this calls us to some deeper questions. So, for example, a state like Oklahoma now wants higher standards for its children. That is their claim. That's what they've said to the country. That's what Louisiana is saying to the country. That's what Bobby Jindal is saying to the country. Then make them. Make them better. Make them higher. Use this experiment and build on it to make it fewer and more rigorous things that are based on evidence that are essential for what our kids need to know. I hope that we'll continue to honor the founding documents and the great conversation they inspire, because all kids do have a right and obligation to learn those kinds of things. Those things matter. And I hope that we will, I know this may sound sentimental, but the reason, Jane, I'm resisting you on set the record straight is that we do that in this act of, I will now tell the facts. And it's easily defensive for me to do that, and no one will care. It is predictable that the person in my position is supposed to say, look, this was a group endeavor, it was, but how could you instead say, yeah, I get all that, but I still feel that there are very smart people who are worried about some things the feds did do or might do. And those are principled people, not stupid people. And there are people who look at that same data and evidence, and they're trying to figure out, is this really going to be good for my kid, or is it going to limit them? And I think if we can have the right kind of conversation, the label of Common Core may change over time, but if we can share a set of higher standards, more based on evidence for kids, I think we have a chance to step forward. But I will tell you, we will lose. We will lose, and we'll lose things of great importance if we dismiss this as an extremist position. Because we all know what's happening in this country. It will migrate to the center, and we'll lose a chance for a new consensus.
Well, and it isn't just one slice of the country that's upset. You know, you have Louis C.K. and Diane Ravitch and you know, homeschoolers and lots of people. So if we were to end up with all of the states having new standards, some of them called Common Core, some of them called the Louisiana standards, but they were about fewer, deeper, what was the third adjective?
Clear.
Clear. And you saw them, you viewed them as similarly rigorous and compelling and moving us forward. Would you be happy with that?
I'd be even happier if there are far lower remediation rates. I mean, let's be candid. Standards alone are not, that's why this is so interesting. How do you go beyond standards to make really good stuff for kids to learn, courses that make sense? How do you ensure kids get propelled in the opportunities they earn? So what I think we all would like to see is a shared effort to do that. I think what we must hold is the notion of telling the truth. I think this is uncomfortable, but basically what happens to many kids is they're told right at the moment they leave college that they are ready for debt and no degree. And we get upset as a society when we tell a fifth grader that. When we say, hey, based on your current, where you are, you're off track. But if you don't tell, the only way to get better in this world is by practice. So if you don't tell someone with enough years to practice that they are off, you're betraying them. And so I think that candor is an irreducible part of where we need to go as a society. Because frankly, low-income kids and kids of certain backgrounds they are most betrayed by these false positive signals.
And I don't know how many of you were at Vicki Phillips' session this morning where she actually read a couple of the standards, and people were a little surprised at how general they were in terms of what the curriculum could be, because I think that, not in this audience necessarily, but standards and curriculum have sort of been conflated. All right, let's talk about College Board.
Okay.
How does your work on K-12 impact the way you see the work of the College Board and higher ed?
I think that, you know, taking this job, I think the most important thing about it, in a funny way, you talked about listening before, we talked about a method of working, was listening to the deepest criticisms and taking them in. So, for example, many people in this country think that test preparation of a high-priced sort is a visible sign of inequality in our country. So while SAT began as a kind of idea that merit would find out, it arguably got corrupted by the world that surrounded it. And then you have a choice as the College Board. You either say, like, ooh, that's not our fault, we made a good test, or you say, it may not be our fault, but it is our problem. And we did that when we announced, as you know, with Khan Academy, that we would, from going forward, we would provide free test preparation for the world. That's the kind of leaning in. We could say that assessment brings opportunity, but remember, you know, that's people who defend assessment always like to say it finds diamonds in the rough. But guess what? It doesn't alone. Doesn't, right? Remember those kids who got those high scores? You have to do more to fulfill its promise. If I were to say to you, so we gave AP Computer Science the other day. We gave we gave it to all kids around the country. In 8 states, no Latinos took the exam. In 11 states, no African Americans took the exam. Less than 20% of the exam takers were girls. Now again, I could say, it's not our fault. We made a really good course. We don't decide who gets into each course. But once again, while it's not our fault, it is our problem. Because those data, and I know all of you know it, if you looked at the employment data from Yahoo and Google, we are building an iron wall of inequality today into the next century. It is visible and evident to us all. So what we can do is we can launch an all-in campaign at the College Board. which is that every single kid, particularly if they are poor, if they are black, if they are Latino, and they are demonstrated by PSAT to be ready for advanced placement, they will be in.
So let's talk a little bit about how that works, because there are a bunch of changes coming to the SAT in 2016. You just mentioned the PSAT, and we were talking about this a couple days ago. So you can identify the kids who wouldn't normally necessarily be on the track to go to college in 10th grade.
Yes.
What do you then do with that data? That data belongs to the College Board. Do you call parents? Do you call teachers?
Well, for the first time, it's really super interesting. So let me just give you a sense of how it operates today. Today, if there are 10 kids who are ready for advanced placement based on PSAT, so PSAT is a pretty good predictor. We can say with a 60% likelihood you'll pass the AP test. So if you are likely to pass AP Math, 6 out of 10 Asian students will wind up taking AP Math who are ready. 4 out of 10 whites, 3 out of 10 African American students, 3 out of 10 Latino students, and 2 out of 10 Native Americans. So I talked to a woman, a wonderful woman, by the way, Barbara Jenkins, who leads Orange County in Florida, African American woman. And she said to me a very interesting thing. She said, we used to base who got into AP based on teacher recommendation. And then we began using the PSAT data. Guess when more black and brown kids got into the courses? PSAT data. So when we worry, perhaps rightly, that assessment can discriminate, let's always remember there's another thing that we know, if we know anything about this country, that can discriminate more, which is adults, which is people. And that's the basic idea here. So the first thing we did is, which is kind of cool, is for the first time we sent letters directly to kids' homes. Because families own this information above all. Only they can get individual student information. No one else can. So families and kids saying, you've got AP potential, take it. Go for it. Just like we did with college. Then we gave lists of kids to schools, not their scores, but who had AP potential.
To their
teachers, to their teachers and their guidance counselors. And then we can begin to measure how many of those kids with potential are actually getting in. And I will tell you what's exciting is there are 8 school districts, I don't know them by heart, it's very moving to me, that every single African American who's ready for AP is now in. And that's what I mean by let's change stuff, because that was hovering at 49%. And with all our wringing our hands about African American performance in STEM and diversifying the pipeline, we can do this. And that I think we have to earn the right for assessment to continue. I differ with some on this. But what I mean by that is people hate tests. And they do with some legitimacy. The unproductive anxiety surrounding SAT sickens me. And how can we transform that test so the practice it inspires is worthy of kids and brings them to a better place and actually delivers something of value? I think you should, frankly, to put it bluntly, this country does not need more tests, it needs more opportunities. And I think that's what the College Board has to seek. And my work in K-12 has caused me to realize, Jane, over time, that we've got to change our game. It's not enough to say, tests give us good data on kids and helps them out. That is not enough.
So we have the ACT and the SAT.
Yeah.
And last year, more kids took the ACT. Anybody here take the ACT? And how many took the SAT? And so last year, in 2013, by about 100,000 kids, I think, more took the ACT. So a fair amount of competition. The changes that you're making to the SAT have anything to do with that?
I'll tell you, from the bottom of my heart, our competitor is not ACT, it's poverty. What is hard to change, I think we will do very well against ACT. I am a competitive person. And that's fun. It's fun to do Coke, Pepsi stuff. But it's not the deeper work. The deeper work is those numbers changing. So as you judge us, I could explain that ACT was much more, and smartly so, active in working with states and partnerships in a way the College Board did not, and that's changing in very exciting ways. And I am proud that rather than leaving the test unchanged, that we've chosen to do few things in math done well. I think it's a liberation for kids. There are 3 areas of math now that are 80% of the SAT. You know what we did with SAT words and vocabulary, right? It used to be, and again, this is talking about taking responsibility. It used to be, when I say an SAT word to you now, when I say you just used an SAT word, it typically means a word you won't hear again and haven't heard before. Is this true? So what's the consequence of that? Can we get real about this? So you do that on a test that's very high stakes, and what happens? Kids, smartly enough, there's only one way to respond to that as a young person. Flashcards. right? Or I'm being very old-fashioned. You can use an application now. I realize physical flashcards like date me. But that's it. But we've made flashcards inevitable, even though every teacher knows it's the worst way to learn words. And it's a very superficial knowledge of words, because all you're trying to vaguely get is like lachrymose sad. That'll get me through this test. So instead, what we've said the vocabulary is it should be words that you'll use over and over again in your first year of college. Words like evident or synthesize. Because to gain mastery of those words, they change depending on when they're used. So synthetic, as you know, can be artificial,
right.
or it can be putting two things together to make something new. It can have
That could be an SAT word.
That should be an SAT word. Does that make sense?
Yes, and so you're changing the vocabulary portion. You've made the essay optional.
Mm-hmm.
You have made guessing less risky.
Yep.
Or you don't penalize.
Call it give it your best shot.
Give it your best shot. Those are big changes.
They are.
I'm staring at Sam, who's got to take this test at some point.
What year are you in, Sam? What year are you in? Awesome. You're my first, I think you're my first or second class taking the new exam. What do you think? I will tell you, kids typically hate changes in exams, just to tell you. You're a mighty conservative group of people. But over 90% of students who are preparing for the new exam are pleased with the changes. It means the world to me, because I'll say something interesting. Some have mocked us because they say we're making it easier, which I think is funny because they don't know a thing about statistics. That is, it's graded on a curve. You can't make, but I love it that it might be much more approachable, much more clear, much more work worth doing, that should get many more diverse students to take a shot at it. And that I love. So a sense of ease and excellence, or ease and rigor. I think we could go too far on the rigor without the pleasure part of doing a few things that make sense done well.
And you talked about lessening the anxiety, the unproductive anxiety. And I made a comment to you at some point that it sometimes feels to me as if college admissions officers are telling us how to raise our kids.
Yeah.
You know, that from the age of 5 and to the age of 18, that's so much a factor in all kinds of decisions we make about their athletics, their academics, their social lives, what clubs they join.
Yeah.
And that feels so unfair.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to reduce some of that parental anxiety and student anxiety?
We will seek to. It's a really interesting view of the institution, because it's like taking the head of the Death Star and saying, can you make, right? I mean, Sally Krawcheck was here today, and she just walked up to me and began to choke me, and she said, this is for my daughter who's 17. And I want to acknowledge that the College Board, you know, again, we have to admit our past we've seen as fostering that, not diminishing it. Tools like SAT and others are seen as part of that kind of industrial complex of unproductive anxiety. And so I want to first confess that I'm very concerned about it. And so what do I think it takes to break it down? The first thing you can't do is say you're going to get rid of anxiety altogether. When I say unproductive anxiety, you know, in athletics, there's a productive kind of game sense of the day. You're going to perform something important, and it accumulates through practice. So what I can do with SAT is make it entirely open. We just released, for the first time in our history, a 200-page set of sample items, the full blueprint of the exam, 2 years in advance. Yep, you can find it. You know, and when there are no secrets, you cannot sell them, I might add, right? So by democratizing practice and giving that open to everyone, can I replace this unproductive anxiety by saying, you are going to have to practice things, and they do matter, but they're not consequential because they're on the SAT? Like these words are important because they're there? No, because you're going to use them widely. Or you get it, kind of the whole shift. I think it then gets into deep questions about the inauthenticity of college admissions. You know, it's bad for everybody. At the most wealthy, it's these highly priced coaches. And what worse thing could a wealthy parent say to their kid than, you're not good enough as you are, and I'm going to hire someone to remodel you for going to college? And the middle class who envies that and kind of imitates that, and lower income kids who are then left out of those. So you should expect of us that we will do everything we can to dismantle that climate. I think this moment of going to college is really formative in kids' lives. It's a moment of announcing who they are and who they might be. And anything the College Board can do to make that a more authentic expression of their fuller self is, I think, very in our interest. And anything we can be alert to where they betray themselves, we should be.
We welcome your questions, and while we're getting the microphones to anybody who has one, I just want to ask you one more question. You talk about leveling the playing field, the work with Khan Academy. I think you'd like to put test prep out of business if you could, because it's not fundamentally fair, or you'd like to make it fair somehow. And yet, aren't standardized tests really something that perpetuates society the way it is versus disrupting it? I mean, are you going to create a disruptive test?
Illiteracy, my friend, keeps society as it is. I only wish it were the dark work of an exam that we could change, rather than fundamental forces preventing kids from mastering a core. I'll give you an interesting example. Someone I know has just gone back to community college to become a nurse, and taking a chemistry course, all his classmates ask for help. And you know what kills these kids who have dreams of making their lives better? I should not say kids, these are adults now. And I know Zoe cares a great deal. She's done great work on opening these possibilities. But where do they fall through? They don't know the math. You don't have time in a chemistry course to learn the core of mathematics that chemistry is an expression of. You don't have time in a college course to learn how to read if you lead at a middle school level. No amount of intervention then. So I think that what we have to do is make tests much more about that focused core. But then we must perform against it. We can't, it is not the test that causes inequality. It's so many other things. And I think that even test preparation has a role in the sense, what I love about Sal Khan is the way he describes mathematics. Teaching you math is not teaching you tricks for an exam. Any of you who love math know this. But if you're good at math, you can solve a problem in almost any format. The test is indifferent to you. You have a command of it that allows you, or when you read well, you're not immediately worried about what you're going to be given. You have a pleasure in the dense words and their expression, or you can write with care. And so I think those fundamentals are what matter. But testing should make those vivid rather than obscure. What I mean by that is when a test measures all of math, but only a core part of it really matters, we've actually betrayed teachers and kids. Because we've said, cover the waterfront, run over everything, learn it all superficially, and that's not useful. So testing has a role, but we can't make things that are essential unessential.
Okay, fair enough. Questions? Yes.
Hello. So I am 17. I am a high school student. I just wanted to say that I have grown up around and been part of the system that the College Board has created. I've gone through it, unfortunately, too early to see your changes. But one of the things I feel like from my experience going through school, and I've been lucky to go to excellent private school with awesome teachers, is that many of my peers feel like they are learning things in this sort of nebulous arms race for college readiness and for, getting a job. And I feel like they get burnt out, or at least my perspective is they get burnt out by that mental model of what education is for. I'm wondering what you think you can do, or what we as a society can do, or what our government can do to make sure that learning for the sake of learning and passion for knowledge and intellectual spirit is fostered just as much as the specific skills in math, reading, and English, because I think, at least in my perspective and my experience, that's been the thing that's driven me more so than, I know this now, what's next?
This gets back to Jane's haunting question about the admissions officers, this kind of arms race as you describe it. And I want to be hesitant. I don't have a ton of wisdom here because there are all sorts of forces driving, as you know, that attitude. And there's a certain amount of competition, again, like we can't just will it away. There are a few spots at schools that a lot of people want to go to, and there's going to be some sorting. I can't end that, but I think there could be something we could do, which is you talk about love and passion and love of learning. And I'll tell you some very interesting data. College Board once did a study on the non-cognitive features outside your academic performance that most predict your success in college. Any guess as to what they found was overwhelmingly the most predictive? This is research done 10 or 15 years ago. It's fascinating.
Reading?
What?
Elective reading?
No, but it's a wonderful answer. Resilience, curiosity, I'm naming these so that you can hear. No?
Is that what you said?
Navigating systems, all wise, by the way, and there's data behind all these things. So when I say not what the study found, I don't mean to say these are not deep and beautiful things to read widely, to be resilient, but if it's okay to say there's one thing, But can I say what's so interesting in a community at Aspen is if any community should know what it takes to succeed in college?
I have a guess, but I could.
Go for it, Jane. It's
Is
cool.
it eating dinner with your family?
No. But thanks for planning. No, just kidding. Family characteristics are always very powerful in all these matters, but I'm talking about a non-familial characteristic here. Money. Again, just to say it, characteristics like money and other features have always tragically been incredibly predictive of success and support. But why don't I just tell you the data, because it's super interesting. But I hope this is interesting to you. It is follow-through. What I mean by that is the most predictive thing they found is those kids who succeed in college do something over time. They might enter a club and then grow in that club and become an officer in that club, or the sustained pursuit of an activity. You might make an analogy, if you chose to employment, where there are some resumes where people jump around all the time and others where they build in certain things. I think what's beautiful about this data is it might mean that rather than getting kids to race around and have to get more and more activities and more of an arms race, that in-depth love and sustained love is a wonderful way to become excellent at something and a wonderful way to get into college. So I hope that the College Board might be a force of sharing that kind of data, because I think that what's terrible truly is kids racing around. I worry about their productive solitude. Remember I talked about it for myself? Nothing terrifies me more than often wealthier parents telling about their kids who are so highly scheduled. What a yucky word for adolescence. And it just, doesn't that creep us out? Shouldn't we as a society, shouldn't that give us pause? That adolescence, so I think that idea of doing fewer things well, I hope actually could give kids a chance to breathe, a chance to ask us more interesting questions, which is, what is it like to find a sustainable thing where you get better and better at it and enjoy it and work through the pain and difficulty of that? And doing one such thing is probably more valuable than 10 others.
Andrea.
Uh-oh. This is a professional. You're not allowed.
No. Following up on that, I don't know if you heard what David Brooks said earlier today in the session with Katie Couric about parenting and the pressure on kids. And I thought it was really profound, because he said that kids sense that they are not getting, kids in this sort of socioeconomic group sense that they're not getting unconditional love, that they're only getting their parents' love when they succeed, when they get into a great school, when they get a great job, when they marry a great spouse, and that there is disappointment projected when they don't do those things. And that is the most damaging thing to the self-esteem and the feeling of worth of a child growing up. And it just seems to play into a lot of what you're saying about the way we educate our kids and this arms race that the young man spoke to.
These are deep waters, and one thing it may relieve you to know is I in no way consider myself the nation's parent or to be able to give advice about parenting. It's so nerve-wracking, because I know how complex it is. I mean, we're talking now about very deep stuff. So I'll just try to say maybe a few things that may be of interest in terms of that question, because I think I'll say something rather stern that may surprise you. Because I think whether it's in parenting or in teaching or a life of a young person, candor does matter. So for example, when we say girls don't like math, no, not okay. They haven't done the practice required. All of us can do mathematics. Every single one of us can do mathematics at a fairly high level. It may take practice and hard work, but what I worry about is when kids hit a moment of resistance or pain, they say, I like reading, not math. I'm sorry, reading without math is not that great, because you can't read science articles, you can't read social study. So I think there's an unproductive indulgence sometimes of the fact that there is pain in practice. And it's a way, it's underestimating kids' resilience and strength to say, no, of course you can. And by the way, that's the great thing about the liberal arts, because the liberal arts at their finest say, we can all be athletes. We can all do serious work in science, the arts, etc. But none of us are good at all of those things. For all of us, we're defeated by one or more of them. But what's cool is that the liberal arts then says, do it anyway. Through practice, you can press yourself. And I find that the delicate dilemma in what you describe, which is it is a form of love, the confidence that through work and practice, you can be excellent. And I think that the research is sometimes, what we're seeing from the research is praising students for the effort they make and for their disciplines of practice may be more powerful and soul edifying than just, but that notion that it's in students' hands, that they're not defeated like I happen to like chocolate ice cream versus vanilla. And the other thing that I think that we don't do, if it's okay to say, is to normalize or make okay the obsessiveness that sometimes serious study has. I worry about girls in computer programming. We're seeing terrible numbers at Google and everywhere else. And why? So why?
Why?
Stupid idea, because girls' brains are wired this way. That's the dumbest idea ever. What it is girls are not practicing for 10,000 hours in a kind of obsessive and somewhat unattractive way. To be a computer nerd is weird. Bill Gates was like alone, and if we force girls to be both sociable, in other words, I think we have to embrace some of the weird solitude that academic excellence implies. Make that okay for kids to be alone sometimes, to maybe be excessive, to maybe read it all night in a sense and still get their sleep. But I think you know what I'm saying, that to say to a young woman that she's going to be a superb programmer while dabbling in computer science is false. And so how do we find a new candor that is not anxiety-producing or destructively? And I ask you, Andrea, if that's thoughtful in terms of what you're trying to probe, because that kind of love is demanding and interesting.
And we heard from the president of Harvard yesterday that one of the ways to get into college, or her advice, was to have an interesting story.
Yeah.
And in a way that reinforces this notion that you have to have a story to tell when you're 18, 17 years old. You have to know what your story is.
I will admit it made me anxious, Jane, when she said that, if I can say that. It made me nervous, that statement. Who determines...
Did you feel that way too?
Yeah, I was not at ease with that statement. I feel like who judges what's interesting? What does that mean? In all candor, you're not going to Harvard if you're interesting, but you don't have academic performance. So I thought it bystepped the clear, very demanding academic. But I think what she meant on a deeper level was something about what you were saying, which is what she was defining interesting as, to both criticize and rescue her statement, was someone who takes advantage of the opportunities around them and who gives back to their community. And doing that by finding a passion, by doing some things in depth in high school, that strikes me as quite promising. But I think we have to be very honest.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions over here if we can get them. Oh, sorry.
Hi there.
Sorry.
A couple of questions for you around AP courses and low-income kids, prepping them for college. We have some districts that are actually now requiring that all kids take either AP or IB. They would have to opt out, but basically they get enrolled. I wondered what your sense was of that. And then secondly, I'm wondering if really AP courses are the best courses with Common Core. I just remember my own kids, memorizing fact after fact, and they were really, AP biology was really boring.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, put a whole lot more kids in AP biology? Is there a more interesting, engaging course with Common Core, and should we be thinking about that for a multitude of kids to get them ready for college?
I will give you great news. So what the woman said was, just because it's hard to hear, and I want to make sure everyone heard you, is AP biology is boring. Why do I want more kids in AP biology? And thank you for that, given I'm president of the College Board. No, I'm just kidding with you. I have great news for you about this, because it's the greatest thing that I inherited from the College Board. So about 5 years ago, a process began at the College Board, before I was there, called AP Redesign. Because if I can be, again, super candid with you, AP classes, not as there was their original intention, began to imitate the worst of college survey courses, being these like vast, memorized, but you would love, I can't wait for you to look at the AP Redesign in biology. We just gave it last year for the first time. It is about a core set of concepts and facts that are highly flexible. And we're doing it with every AP course, fewer things done well. In US history, everything we're doing to fight that mile wide, inch deep thing. That, to me, is true accountability, is listening that, because you're right. You're right. Teachers complain about it, parents complain about it, and the only good news is we listened, and we're doing these redesigns together with college faculty and teachers. And I'll tell you a very interesting thing. We just redesigned AP Biology. Guess what percentage of kids got 5s, the highest score? down from, I think, 20%, I don't know the exact number, to 5%. Whoa. Because depth is harder. We just gave the redesigned AP chemistry test to 120 college students, including some kids at some pretty fancy colleges. How did they do? How many got 5s? 120 of them. 3. Interesting, right? So I think, I'll tell you 2 things about your question.
Can I stop you for a second?
Oh, sure, of course.
Aren't you, you're sort of saying the same thing that you were saying about Common Core. It's going to get harder because it's going to be deeper. There are going to be fewer topics you have to master, but they're going to be more meaningful, and the learning itself is going to be more significant.
And that scientists and mathematicians are so excited. I mean, you see, the one thing that's cool about the College Board is we work with college faculty, we work with employers who work with these kids, and we co-design the work along with K-12 teachers. So what you've gotten is them finally saying, yeah, and I want to be clear, though, because sometimes people get confused. This does require a lot of fluency and understanding. So it's not like this dumb debate between do you know how to do the math as well as can you do the math? Of course you have to be able to do the math. You have to be precise and accurate, and you have to be able to do it. But to answer your question about should everyone do it, I think this gets very deep. Anyone guess, another fun fact, what's the modal score, the most popular score on AP Calculus today? The most gotten number from a 1 to 5 scale. It is a 1. So the notion that we should put everyone in AP Calculus, we have to, in my judgment, earn the right to put everyone in AP. What I hope for, what I seek, is that every single student in this country would be ready to do college-level work in the high school, because nothing predicts your success in college more overwhelmingly than your ability to do the work before you get there. So it is a noble vision, but it requires hard work, which is you've got to get the kids ready. That's my real answer to your question.
All right, we just have a couple minutes. There we go.
Well, it's been a long time since I took the SAT, since I'm 73, not 17.
Do you remember your scores? You don't need to tell us, but I'm just curious.
It was all right.
Yeah.
I got to go to good schools.
I thought they were very impressive myself.
Seriously, recognizing the limits on time and money, in Miami, at the Miami Art Museum, we have a program where we bring every 3rd grader in the county to the Miami Art Museum every year. We precede that at the Paris Art Museum of Miami. We precede that by training the teachers so that they know ahead of time what their students are going to see. Now, knowing that art ain't math and it ain't reading and it ain't English, are we wasting our time?
You know, it's interesting because the arts community has been delighted that we're developing with them ways of integrating the arts even into our understanding of the revised SAT, for example. So I will, again, veer into an uncomfortable candor. Martha Graham says beautifully about teaching dance that you should be in some area an athlete of God. And she talks about the painful daily work, the breaking of small bones, the practice that makes you excellent. I think exposing a group of kids to the arts is a beautiful thing that opens up the soul, and there is more to education than, but of course you can talk about creativity and everything else. But what changes the soul, what makes it more powerful, is practice. And I don't think you should believe for a moment that the mere exposure to the arts, without the devotion to the arts, without learning and refinement, will change someone. And I think sometimes we make that mistake when we talk about the arts, as if it's mere play. There's no more demanding than an artist. There's no one more thoughtful about the choices they make or do not make. And so I think when the arts achieve that precision and intensity, they're one of the most powerful things we've got.
Sir Mike?
I'm also from Miami. I know that museum well. And we designed it with self-flushing toilets. And I think that that is the great thrill of the 3rd graders when I see them leaving the museum. I have a question for you. For the past 3 years, I have volunteered in a poor inner-city school in Miami. Miami is the 4th largest school system in the country, and the city of Miami is the 4th poorest urban community. When you talk about what you're doing and all, it's quite wonderful. And you talked about illiteracy. But I deal with the kids who are illiterate and who will probably always be illiterate. And they are overwhelmed with whatever the curriculum is, and now the core curriculum is coming in, which may be quite good because they can read. But after you ask them a question about the 2 lines they read, they have no idea. Critical thinking is completely lost. And so this is a school that's 5% white, as are many in Miami. And all that you're talking about is also wonderful, but it doesn't pertain to a large population in this country who we are losing.
Yeah.
Are you, and in your position, doing anything really concrete about these issues?
Well, there are questions of how far, in how early grades the College Board's reach will go. I'll tell you, I sit on Hillary Clinton's Too Small to Fail initiative because I think inequalities in early childhood are persevere and limit us all. The word gap in early childhood should be as visible as this country as hunger in young children. But I want to say something controversial. If you were to look at kindergarten, 5th grade literacy textbooks, where these kids are going to school despite their poverty, the attendance rates are very high. They're being fed a gruel of disconnected texts, often nonsensical, when they should be developing a core set of knowledge, richly reading in science, in the arts, in history, as well as literature, in these earliest grades, to give them a foundation for later literacy. To starve them with 3rd-rate materials and then blame poverty strikes me as all wrong. So I think that we need to insist on, and that I think is something that parents, again, bring us full circle. If we do anything with this movement around standards, let's try to get really good stuff in front of kids. Because the poorer you are, the more you're relying on the school to give you that. It's not happening outside of school, and shame on us if we don't.
All right, David, I want to say thank you. We're out of time, and thank you very much. And we'll all go back and take the test and see how it is. Thank you.